Welcome back to Management 2020. This video looks more at discourse structure. So in this video, we'll talk about levels of language that we've discussed already and how discourse fits into that. We'll talk about organizational patterns for discourse, and then we'll review concepts that should be familiar to already about thesis statements, supporting paragraphs, introductions, and conclusions. So when we think about language and the levels or the detail of languages, we can start just at the level of word. But usually individual words are not enough to convey the meanings that we need to convey in business context. So we move to sentences. And sentences can do a lot more because sentences can show relationships between ideas. But even still, they're pretty limited in the complexity. And that's where we move to paragraphs. And even sometimes paragraphs just aren't enough to convey the depth of complexity and relationships. And so then we move to what's called discourse. One way that you may have viewed discourse before is in a speech. A speech has multiple oral paragraphs, or an essay has multiple written paragraphs. So both of those are examples of this extended discourse. I just wanted to provide this image here of the American Council for the Teaching of Foreign Languages. And they describe language proficiency according to this sort of inverted cone. And at the bottom in the blue area, they have novice language speakers. And generally, novice language speakers can only communicate really at the word level, maybe some memorized sentences. This was my ability as an English teacher in China. When I spoke Chinese, I really just had memorized some words or simple phrases that I could use to get by, but I really didn't have very high proficiency. Now, at the next level, you'll see is the green. And generally, green or intermediate language is described as being able to create sentences. So you know enough language of both vocabulary and grammar that you can use sentences to take care of your needs. And in some cases, this is really my Spanish proficiency. I know enough to get by if I were in a Spanish-speaking country. But really, I can't go into much depth about any topics except, maybe religious topics because I did work as a Spanish-speaking missionary for a time. Now, when we get into the orange level, this is called the advanced range, and this is really where we get into paragraph level communication, right? We can state an idea, we can give supporting details, we can give evidence, examples. So the idea of either a written or an oral paragraph. And this is more my ability in French. Right? I lived in French-speaking countries for a couple of years, came back to SU and as a faculty member and took French classes and kind of pushed myself up to get more than just that paragraph level. But what we see in the yellow in that superior range, that's what's called sort of discourse level. It's not just an idea of stating individual paragraphs, but being able to join paragraphs together to create a larger argument or a larger statement that has multiple supporting or detailed paragraphs to support it. And really, this is what comes from university study. In university study, we're developing our discourse level language that we're able to not just speak in simple sentences or even in detailed paragraphs, but we can connect ideas together to make larger points. So as we make those larger points, there's different ways to organize them. And there's more ways than maybe your textbook talks about. Your textbook highlights 3 that are most commonly used in business settings. And one of them is order of importance, right? So you organize your discourse, your paragraphs, according to highlighting what is important to build an argument. This is used a lot in argumentative or persuasive writing. And an example in the business field might be a proposal to replace software. And so you want to build this proposal to get senior management to approve the purchase of the software. And so you sort of build this argument. Now, another common one used is chronological. Okay, in chronological, you just relay what happened in order of time. So this might be an email explaining an expense report process. Right? You need to teach staff or employees at the company how to complete this process, so you go through it step by step. Now, the third one that the textbook mentions is spatial, and at first I thought, really, this is not very common. I mean, who is really describing something in terms of a physical location and sort of guiding someone through a physical location? But as I thought about it, actually in the past year, I've done multiple things that involved spatial organizational structures. For example, in one of them, we had to propose using a venue for a conference, and we needed to talk about what were the locations in the conference venue and how would that work to accomplish the different stations or departments that needed to be present at the conference. But also technical instructions might use this, right? As you're describing maybe how to operate or use a machine, even something as simple as a photocopier, helping someone understand how the different components of the photocopier in this space work together. But also, I had to travel overseas to meet with a partner. And really, what we were doing was looking at different locations that this partner might want to establish their business, an educational based business, and giving them advice on the locations that they were selecting, how that worked with traffic, how that worked with public transportation, and how the space itself would be conducive to the goals that they were trying to accomplish within their educational business. So even spatial is used. It's maybe a little more specialized, and it's certainly not used as much as the others. But from my own experience, I had several I could think of over the past year. So when we have these extended discourse documents or texts, they often will use something called a thesis statement. Now, we're all very familiar probably with thesis statements from academic writing courses, but ultimately a thesis statement communicates the goal or purpose of the text. And so we often find them in essays and other kinds of persuasive writing. In business, we'll see them in proposals. We'll see them even in reports. Because even though we think of a report as maybe being objective, usually a report is designed to make some kind of recommendation. And so you're using the information or the data in the report to draw some kind of conclusion. And so again, it might have something like a purpose statement or a thesis statement. Even email requests, where I'm asking someone to do something, I'm building very brief, very concise rationale for why they should do that thing, maybe to help me or fulfill the request that I'm asking them to do. So thesis statements are common, not just in written language, but also in oral language, giving speeches, other kinds of things where we want to persuade or convince the audience of a main point, and then we'll use supporting information to reinforce that main point. So support for a thesis usually comes in the form of claims, reasons, and evidence. You may have heard this before in an academic writing course. And we organize claims, reasons, and evidence into body paragraphs. And really, as we said, the purpose of all those body paragraphs is to reinforce that thesis statement or that purpose statement, to show the audience, to give them details, to help them understand why that idea is important or why they should agree with that idea or support that idea. So what makes a good body paragraph? If you like, pause the video for a second and reflect on it. What are the good elements of a good body paragraph that's part of a longer or extended discourse? So we talked about this briefly a little bit before, but body paragraphs begin with topic sentences usually. And topic sentences might also have a transition. Now, usually they're the first sentence, or at least near the beginning. Sometimes there's more of a transition from the previous idea to the next idea, and then that becomes a topic sentence. It may be the same sentence, it may be two separate sentences. But then within the body paragraph, we have things like definitions or details. Depending on what the audience needs to know or what they already know about this topic, we may need to define terms. We may want to give examples or evidence to help support, help them believe or understand the main idea of the paragraph. And then we may also include things like analysis or explanations so they know what that means or how that connects and why it's important. And lastly, body paragraphs may end with a summary sentence. And a summary sentence can do two things. The first thing is it can remind the reader what they just read about. Sort of that reinforce that, remind them, even though I had all these examples, explanations, analysis, here's the main thing I want you to take away from this paragraph. But then often it will connect back to the thesis statement of the whole document. So reminding him, this is just one thing I want you to remember because it reinforces this main idea. So then what makes a good introduction? How do we structure an introduction to prepare an audience for the body paragraphs that are going to follow? So many people would say a good introduction starts off with a hook, something to get the reader's interest. And this is certainly more common in maybe persuasive or literary kinds of writing, but it's still possible to use in business writing as well. Additionally, we might provide some background information on the topic to help the readers understand the context for which we're going to make this purpose or thesis statement. So the thesis or purpose statement comes near the end of the introduction, and it may also be followed by something called a roadmap. Um, and a roadmap basically forecasts what the rest of the discourse will be. And I'm sure you can think of speeches where the speaker has done this, right? They have laid out their argument, and then they said, here's how I'm going to support my argument. With some main claims, and then the rest of the speech is going further into depth at explaining those claims. So then what makes a good conclusion? Again, if you like, pause the video, think about this a moment, and then compare your response with the information on the next page. So a good conclusion will often paraphrase the thesis statement. So it reminds the reader at the end of the discourse, this was the main point I wanted to make, or this is the main purpose. And then they'll review often those main claims or main support that the body had. So here's the things that I told you about to support that main idea. Many times then they will end with this application, right? They will either say, here's how you could take this information and use it. So kind of a so what? Why did all this matter? Here's why it matters. Or sometimes they will end with an invitation for the audience to take action. Like, here's how you now should go and use this information. It's not enough to know it. Let's apply it. So in this video, we talked about discourse structure. We talked about sort of levels of language from word up to extended discourse like speeches or essays. We talked about different organizational patterns, and then we talked how extended discourse is usually organized with introductions that have thesis statements, with body paragraphs that support the thesis, and then conclusions that remind readers or audience members of the main points and helps them then make connections with the text and the application outside of the text.